This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. I'll tell you a secret. When I decided Thank You Mama will be a podcast, I've never heard a single podcast episode ever in my life. I just knew this was the topic I was passionate about and I had to put out there in the world. And interviews were just a perfect medium. I've been doing this for 6 years now, and I only and very occasionally listen to 2 podcasts, Wiser Than Me and On Being. And I love them both because they are fascinating, entertaining, and inspiring interviews with people who can teach us about life. And also because they feel very sincere, not overproduced or staged. And this is exactly my goal for Thank You Mama. So both these podcasts publish shorter, tighter versions of interviews, as well as long, unedited versions. And since I started Thank You Mama, I was always aiming to keep the interviews to under 30 minutes because I feel that that's the amount of time we can spare for an episode. And sometimes the conversations are so fascinating, I allow them to go to 45. I aim to be under 45. And then last week, I started talking to Elinor. And we just couldn't stop talking. We spoke for more than an hour. And then I started editing the episode with her and tried to stick to the topic. But it really broke my heart to cut out all those parts I found very important. Like Elinor talking about her writing, about menopause, about the history of patriarchy. So, for the first time, but maybe not the last, I've decided to give you a choice. I edited the episode down to 45 minutes, trying to stick to your usual Thank You Mama format and topics. And I will publish both this streamlined version and the long unedited version. Just because I really think the topics we covered are so fascinating, and it's really a shame to leave them somewhere on the floor of the editing room. And just because I know you will love them both. So you can choose how much time you want to listen to Elinor Cleghorn and me talk about women, mothers, mother's work, patriarchy, menopause, women's health, women's emancipation, single mothers, mothering, and so many other topics. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Unedited. My guest today is Dr. Elinor Cleghorn. Elinor is a feminist cultural historian, writer, and researcher. She's the author of Unwell Women, which has been translated across the world and in which she explores the roots of perpetual misunderstanding, mystification, and misdiagnosis of women's bodies, illness, and pain. Her new book is called A Woman's Work, Reclaiming the Radical History of Mothering. It just came out this March. And her writing on women's health and its histories has been published in the Wall Street Journal, BBC History, BBC Science Focus, New Scientist, and Vogue. Elinor, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. It's lovely to be here.
I am very, very excited to have you here. I just told you we had a little chat before we started recording. I remember Unwell Women coming out. I have not read it, sorry, Elinor, but I remember I lived in Seattle or Los Angeles back then. I remember it made a big, big splash. I remember reading a lot about it. Obviously, the world was ready for that book. Thank you for writing it. Will you tell my listeners about it?
Yes. So Unwell Women was my first book. It was published in the UK and the US in 2021. And
why
it was
did
a
I think
book.
2017? I miss.
Oh, 2021.
Okay, good. Sorry. I don't know
That's
why
okay.
Okay, I got the date wrong. Yes.
And it was inspired by an experience that I had for many years of being misdiagnosed or really ignored when I went to the doctors seeking answers for pain and other illness symptoms that I'd had from about my late teens. And I would get symptoms like joint pain. I had issues with sun sensitivity. I had digestive issues, migraines, and they would kind of wax and wane. And I would go to the doctor and explain how I was feeling. And I always received an answer that was some variation of, well, it's just because you're a young woman. And I was never referred for any tests or given any sort of treatment guidance or any further investigative help. I was just kind of dismissed and told, you're hormonal, you're a young woman, you're stressed,
Oh, they
you're
say
anxious.
stress. Yes, I love it. It's always stress. When they don't know
Yes.
what it is, it's stress.
Okay. You're stressed. And, flash forward to my late 20s, and I'm pregnant with my second child, my son, and it's discovered that I have an autoimmune disease called lupus, and that my son, when I was pregnant, during the pregnancy, he had a heart condition while he was growing inside my body that is caused by the disease mechanism behind this condition called lupus. So once I was pregnant, and it was really important to figure out why my baby had such a slow heart rate, I was given all the tests necessary and diagnosed effectively with lupus within one afternoon. And as I began to be treated for this disease and to talk to specialist doctors, they explained that I probably had developed the condition, or at least the condition had sort of emerged in me with symptoms from around my late teens. That's very typical, late teens, early 20s.
Sorry, I will interrupt you very shortly.
Yeah.
Had it been diagnosed earlier, would it have been treatable? I don't know about lupus.
Yes.
So you could have been treated and your son wouldn't have had heart issues. Okay.
I could have been treated earlier, and I could have taken the medication that I've been on for a long time now to manage my disease. And when it came to pregnancy, because there are high risks for lupus mothers in pregnancy, I would have been managed throughout my pregnancy, looked after by specialist doctors. So if something like the condition my son had did arise, I would have been in exactly the right place to be treated and cared for properly. So without that knowledge, of course, I proceeded into my second pregnancy and discovered that my son had this heart condition when I was about 30 weeks pregnant, when we have a particular kind of ultrasound scan in the UK. So being misdiagnosed for that long and being told, well, you're only in pain because you're a young, stressed out, hormonal woman, really inspired me to want to understand not just the problem of women's treatment by the medical establishment in the present, but to go back through time and really get to the roots of why so many women still were experiencing something similar to what I'd been through, which is being told that their pain, their illness symptoms were rooted in the condition of their being a woman rather than in an underlying disease, for example. And at that time, questions around the gender pain gap, medical misogyny were just emerging into the popular consciousness. So we were seeing a little bit more discussion around gender disparities in medicine outside of medicine proper. And it felt to me like the right time to suggest a book, to start researching a book that really got to the bottom of this. So that was the inspiration. And I have a background as an academic historian. So the two, my personal experience married with my academic interests.
What was your PhD on? What is your academic?
So I have a background in feminist cultural history, and I studied as an art historian, and then my PhD looked at women film artists from the first 50 or so years of cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite a different, I mean, I've always been very interested in feminist culture, in the history of feminist thought. And when I came to do my postdoctoral research at the Ruskin School of Art in Oxford, I was appointed onto a project that looked at a really complex neurological condition that's linked to perception and sensation.
Mm.
And it was during that postdoctoral appointment that I really began to become interested in the field that we call medical humanities, which is exploring topics that emerge from medicine, from biomedical science, from illness experience, and bringing them into dialogue with literature, with history, bringing them out of that sort of scientific margin and into and through different disciplines of thought and writing. So there were different forces at play behind Unwell Women, but combination of personal experience, academic impulse, and the way that my research interests were turning after my postdoc.
What were there, I know it's a big book and complex, were there main things you took out of this research, main messages or main learnings?
Yes, I think that when it comes to women's health, although medicine has it's progressed exponentially in terms of scientific knowledge and understanding over hundreds of years, what hasn't necessarily progressed is the way that women's bodies, pain, the condition of being unwell is viewed within our culture, within our sort of Western global North culture. So the myth of women being very hysterical, for example, that when women say, I'm not well, and that must be rooted in something that's being conjured up in their minds or through their emotions, rather than in their bodies and the way that their bodies are reacting. And this, I think, is still very much with us now, although, so many brilliant people are writing and researching around this topic. So many people are speaking out about their experiences of medical dismissal, gender-based medical dismissal. We see it all the time in the way that, say, diagnostic times for diseases that predominantly affect women are very long. I mean, endometriosis, for example, takes something like 9 years, 4 months at the moment to get conclusively diagnosed in the UK, which is nearly a decade of a person's life. And there is no reason why, when we know so much, we have so much knowledge about the human body and about the human body in a medical context, there is no reason why a diagnosis for a disease that is really life-limiting should take a person nearly a decade. And so when we think about, we have the knowledge, we also have the knowledge of what the economics of these diseases are, how much money it costs to have somebody trying to pursue a diagnosis for that long, and how much it costs, say, to the UK economy, for example. Even with those figures and that knowledge, we are still expecting women to struggle and fight to be heard and to obtain answers about their own bodies and minds and to be cared for properly. So when we look at the fact that we have the knowledge and we have we know what it costs us, not just financially, but what it costs the individual in terms of their life, it can only be misogyny that's the obstacle. And the way that that's either implicit or explicit. So it may be that biases against women's pain, against how women's pain is seen, have just not been addressed, and that we all carry different biases. I don't believe that medical professionals are consciously wanting to hurt and harm
No, no,
women. I
no,
really
no,
don't.
no, no.
But we have historical biases that are
Historical,
very,
thousands of years. Thousands
deeply,
of
deeply
years.
ingrained
Yeah,
over
yeah,
thousands of years.
yeah.
And these biases are not just specific to medicine. They're
Mm,
within our
mm,
culture. We have a
yeah,
cultural problem with the idea of women
yeah.
in pain.
Mm, mm. Elinor, here's something I've been thinking about a lot and never actually spoke to anybody about, but maybe I'm curious about what do you think about this? So, going on Instagram and being a woman in my almost 52, I often have all these menopause things, pop up. And I became very disturbed by the amount of women who go out there and they talk about their menopause and they say they're so angry and they're forgetful and their brains don't work and they're this and so they turn this into dysfunctionality, both emotional and physical. But also more and more researchers and studies being published that say women lose brain cells in menopause and this and this. So I am very torn between. I thankfully have not experienced any symptoms. I'm very torn between, yes, we need to be aware this is what women are going through and we have to recognize it and acknowledge it and support women. But I'm very nervous this is going to be turned against women at one point or is already being turned against women. I mean, I'm thinking of work situations. I'm thinking of being a boss and having a woman in your office who's 50. If these things come popping up on your, media, you will be like, oh my God, she's going to start becoming forgetful. She's going to become angry, emotional, hot flash. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about how do we manage this?
Yeah. I think that, like a lot of women, because I'm 46, and similarly, I probably see a similar timeline to you, right? Things kind of pop up in front of my eyeballs as well. And writing about what I write, I inevitably see a lot of content based around, midlife women's health, predominantly perimenopause and menopause. But why, on the one hand, I think that this increased awareness of the symptoms that many women go through that are still not really properly understood or acknowledged by many healthcare professionals. I think that's really important. But I do agree with you that there is something about the way that the menopause is being resold to women.
Exactly.
I mean, there is a kind of industrial complex, right? At the moment, there's a menopause industrial complex, and we're in our midlives, we are being sold everything and anything under the sun that's supposed to make us not turn from being these menopausal crones into being these sort of beatific and calm midlife ladies. From supplements to, well, it's usually supplements, isn't it? But bed blankets I've even seen for night flushes and everything you can think of, teas. And this, I agree with you, it's creating an image. It's sort of another version of the hysterical woman, isn't it? Being kind of sold back to us.
This is what I'm nervous about. Exactly. And exactly at the time when we don't need it.
Yeah.
Exactly when we're around 50, we're so experienced. We bring so much to the table. The kids are out of the house for many of us. We can, we can enter this great new phase of our lives.
Yes.
But I don't want the society to see us as this, as you say, hysterical, dysfunctional women, because this is what's being promoted right now as a menopausal woman.
I mean, it's so the awareness in a medical setting is, of course, really important, and to destigmatize, demystify hormonal treatments, if that's what you want to do, and have that as something that's easy to get with good guidance and no sort of stigma and struggle attached is so important. And I feel like if that was easier at a sort of medical care level, like any other medical treatment you might need to pursue, then we would have less of this kind of shilling of the men, you know, this vision of a certain kind of falling apart midlife woman in order to get us to buy things we simply don't need. What we need is, you know, conversation and creativity. And I agree with you, like the experience and the intelligence that we have at this age in our lives is an incredible gift. I think it's a gift to have this part of life where you have all this experience, you're able to apply it to your thought. You know, I think I can think more interestingly than I ever could probably at an earlier time in my life.
Yeah.
And that's not really what is thought about. It feels childish, honestly, to kind of diminish us and present this sort of, oh, we're forgetful, aren't we silly? I was talking to someone on another interview recently about the whole, oh, silly mummy, like the mum brain thing, you know, oh, isn't mummy
mum
silly?
brain,
Mummy
exactly.
forgot this. And it's another version of that, isn't it? This sort of older,
but
forgetting
you know,
everything.
It upsets me that women do this to themselves. I mean, not all women, but I see so many of these in middle-aged influencers talking about it and stars. And, you know, it became... I don't like it that we women frame it that way, frame our menopause in that way.
Yeah.
It's going to be turned against us, and it's not.
And it was in history, you know, the idea of a woman running out of reproductive value, in inverted commas, meant that the way that menopause or menopausal period of time was interpreted was as a decline and a diminishment and a running out of use. And the menopause, you know, in the 19th century, for example, was often written about by gynecologists as this awful time, like no woman will get through it without, you know, severe sort of symptoms and decline and anger. And the idea that when, you know, going back a century or so and thinking about our limited knowledge. So the idea that when estrogen was in decline, that everything that feminized us, that made us feminine, was depleting. And of course, 19th century ideas of femininity were about serenity and docility and maternity. They were not about intelligence and dynamism and thought. These were ideas about our maternal, nurturing, docile. So this was sort of never part of the conversation that women actually become a different kind of intelligent, a different kind of experience, that they have this opportunity for, you know, the childishness of we become hysterical, you know, adolescent girls, and then we are mummies, and then we're just hysterical crones. We should know better than this. These narratives have been sold to us before, and we have tried to overcome them.
And I want to mention two things. One, I'm experiencing it, and I'm just loving it. I'm loving this phase so much. I can't tell you. And I just finally, women talk a lot about it, not giving a damn. Like just finally, for the first time in my life, being like, this is me and I'm awesome and I don't give a damn what you think or what, you know, and just feeling, I don't know, I'm just very, very happy in myself right now, with myself right now.
I agree with you with that.
I started teaching at the university, and that kind of goes together with it. This is this new person you're talking about. Instead of becoming a hysterical, useless woman, I am now the woman who's collecting all of these experiences and everything, and I can give it to the world. The other thing I wanted to mention about this is, having done 200 of these interviews and learning about mothers and their lives, it is incredible, Elinor, how often I hear about this Mom 2.0 that happens around the 60s. There are so many women who start a completely new life, reinvent themselves, find their truth, their true identities, and become the happiest they've ever been. My mom went through this. I've watched her do this. So one of my biggest lessons and messages from this podcast, and hopefully the book one day, this is what I want to remind women of. This is what we should be concentrating on when we're aging. This amazing new phase, this amazing new us that we're bringing to the world, and not the hysterical, forgetful. Yeah. Elinor, let's move towards a woman's work. Now we learned all about, thank you, sharing about the Unwell woman. How did a woman's work happen?
I was thinking towards new subjects or next subjects after I wrote Unwell Women, and the history of motherhood, of maternity, of the way that women's reproductive biology has sort of centered patriarchal opinions about who women are was very present in the research and reading that I was doing for Unwell Women, because for centuries, women have been seen as primarily reproductive vessels, reproductive material, and the ways that doctors and medical writers have theorized about women's bodies over time has always been very centered on maternity, on childbearing. And often, maternity and childbearing is seen as the reason, not just for women's existence, like that's the purpose of women. It's also been weaponized against them as the reasons for their deficiencies. Everything we were just talking about, really, weaponized against them as the reason for women's weaknesses, for their, say, intellectual inferiority compared to men. It's been seen as the root of their inability to participate in the world of work and politics and culture. So it really made sense to me to start exploring the history of motherhood. So to look at the ways that the patriarchal culture over time has constructed dominant ideas about motherhood that women have been affected by in their mothering lives. But then at the same time, to look at the ways that women have embraced those ideas, pushed against them, resisted them, mothered on their own terms, mothered in spite of racial, class-based, gender-based oppressions against them. So to sort of present these two stories, that we have this overarching patriarchal view of motherhood, and that we also have mothering as the work that so many women have done so differently over time.
We just talked about Maria Gimbutas's book I just read. She's an archaeologist. She used to teach or lead the Department of Archaeology at UCLA in California. She talked a lot in the book that I read. Her topic are the goddesses and these prehistoric societies that she claims were worshipping Mother Nature or the big goddess or Mother Goddess or whatever you want to call her, because she claims that in all her excavations, this is what she would find. She would find the sculptures of goddesses or women, pregnant women, birthing women, and so on and so forth. But she also talks about how through, again, research and excavations she did, these cultures did not have hierarchies. She claims that the only special graves would be older women who were buried in the ground floor of the house, the family house. Talking about poltergeist. And it was not a warrior culture. They were peaceful, non-hierarchical, planet Earth, nature, women, life worshipping cultures. She claims around 3000 BC is when the, I forgot terminology, but the Proto-Indian? No?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the other people came from the north.
Yes.
the people who didn't know how to do agriculture but knew how to horseback ride and have weapons and so on, and they took over, and this is how slowly patriarchy, how the warriors took over and patriarchy happened. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because, again, the whole hope of this podcast, little by little, and these projects are that we get reminded that maybe there were different cultures. Maybe we are capable of having a different society and a different order or different values in our society. And I think planet Earth needs that very urgently. Absolutely. So thank you about writing. You started your book with 900 BC, and you also start with this. You talk about this a little bit, about this matriarchal.
Yes, I do. So I start the book with a story about a tiny handmade red clay boat that was dated to about the 8th or 9th century BCE. And it was discovered in a cave on the southern coast of Crete near a small fishing village. And this excavation happened in the 1970s, I think 1971. And the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, which is on Crete, sent an excavation team to the cave that had been breached by looters. And as they were digging through the chambers in the soil, they found an absolutely fascinating abundance of objects, ranging from jewelry and household objects or remnants of such, but also found these little handmade clay objects, many of which depicted, as you were saying earlier, birthing, references to birthing. So birthing figures, say 2 figures holding each other, perhaps to represent the midwife or birth attendant and her and the birthing mother. Tiny figurines of women feeding swaddled babies, tiny little babies in a sort of cot. And then they found this little ship into which was placed a tiny clay model very closely resembling a human fetus. And the archaeologists who pieced these remnants together also worked out that at one point there were gunwales on this little ship, and there were a crew of women sailors with bare breast and a raised arm, which is a goddess, which is a sort of goddess motif from the time. And when I was looking at the exhibition catalogue for this particular dig from Heraklion Museum, I learned that this cave was thought to be a place of worship for a birth goddess called Eileithyia. Now, Eileithyia is present in Greek mythology. She's in the Odyssey. She's the daughter of Hera by Zeus. And she is honored in classical Greece as a goddess of childbirth. There were lots of different goddesses and protectresses of new mothers and childbirth who were honored by women in ancient and classical Greece, and Eileithyia was one of them. Now, in classical mythology, in the Olympic pantheon of gods and goddesses, Eileithyia is a minor deity. But in prehistory, Eileithyia turns up much more prominently as a goddess with a very long history of worship. And this has been figured out through archaeology, through the sites where there are archaeological remnants that point towards birthing or rituals to do with birthing. And what I really loved about this particular story, I mean, firstly, that the ship is so beautiful and so curious. And the idea, and we don't know who made it. We know nothing about who made the object or why they dedicated it at this particular shrine. But from what is known, we can glean that the devotee who went to the shrine at that point in history and donated their tiny handmade item, that they were doing so most likely to ask for protection, to be kept safe during pregnancy and while giving birth. Because that's how Eileithyia functioned later on in the centuries. She was honored, she was appealed to by birthing women. And so that's what we can know. But the existence of this cave shrine to a goddess who specifically protects new mothers, birthing women, newborn infants, we can't know for sure the details of how matriarchal societies were organized. And if anyone wants to read more about this in the context of patriarchy, I really recommend this book by Angela Saini called The Patriarchs, where Angela is a brilliant sociologist and theorist. And Angela writes about how we can't know for sure about the organization of matriarchal societies in prehistory. Because what's really important is to think about, does the prevalence of goddesses in the worshipful culture mean that women themselves had power and influence in their societies? So that's always important to think about. But just the existence of these material remnants of an experience that is throughout so much of history ignored and made invisible and not written about by the men who were doing the making of history. It shows that women were, that these societies at that time centered matriarchal experience, that, because making a votive to donate at a shrine is a way of telling a story. It's a narrative act. You're telling a story. You're hoping for a safe birth. You're hoping for a living child. There's a story embedded in that, and that's forever part of history. So we can know there are many uncertainties, but what we can know is that there was an honoring of maternal experience, and there was a matriarchal culture within which to do that honoring. And it felt to me like the right place to begin the book.
Yeah. It was a beautiful place to begin the book. Is there anything else you would like to tell us about the book, or should we jump to Mama Sarah?
The book, I'll just tell you a little bit, if that's okay, about the book, the structure of the book and the timeline. So it begins in the 9th, 8th century BCE on this island on the southern coast, fishing village on the southern coast of the Isle of Crete, and then moves through the centuries chronologically until more or less the present, or at least to my own childhood and experience of being mothered myself. And it really sort of asks us to rethink the importance of mothering and motherhood to history. So while it's also a history of what, a lot of sort of patriarchal figures have thought about motherhood and imposed upon people who mother, it's also a history of the importance of mothering to things like political movements and to creativity and to social change. So I talk about things like the importance of mothering and the maternal identity as a form of social responsibility that women took on, for example, in the campaign to abolish chattel slavery. Maternal identity, very important to activist women involved in that movement. I talk about the way that maternity and maternal identity underscored the sort of beginnings of the movement for women's rights in the 19th century. So it does take in a lot of that sort of political history as well. But above all, it's my attempt to reclaim mothering as to the writing of history and to center a telling of history through mothers and mothering.
Elinor, now I have another trick question, like with menopause. And it's, again, I think the existence, the reality of womanhood is constant balancing, a balancing act. How do we put motherhood in its rightful place and give it its rightful value and recognition and support without turning women into birthing vessels, without using it as it has been throughout the history, which you write about in your book, to cement patriarchy?
So this is such an important question, and it's a crucial one too, because on the one hand, it's my feeling that motherhood and mothering, what that actually involves, which is the thought, the care, the strength, the resilience, all of this, as we were talking about earlier with midlife women, actually, mothering is another form of experience that endows the people who do it with, it takes an incredible amount of thought and emotional investment and strategy to mother. It is work, it's love, but it is also work. And honoring, thinking about mothering differently. Throughout history, for example, patriarchal culture has been very keen to impress upon women that it's extremely natural to be a mother, that it's innate in women, that by virtue of having female biology, you are naturally fitted not just to be a mother, but to be very good at it and to be perfectly fulfilled by it. And also crucially, to not need any help to do it. There's been real focus in Western history on the idea of the mother as this sort of perfect kind of sovereign resource for caring for her children, like within the nuclear family, which is a patriarchal unit. The mother is responsible for the birthing and the raising of the children. She's dependent on a man in order to do that. So there's this real centering of mothering throughout Western history has been incredibly important to the perpetuation of the future, for example, but not a focus on what it actually takes to do that work in society, what the significance of that work is. And because we haven't thought about mothering like that, motherhood hasn't been respected for the work that it is. It's been seen as this natural resource.
You just have babies and you do it.
Yeah, you just do it. And you do it so perfectly.
Yeah.
So that is
and it's easy.
the rationale.
It's natural.
Yeah. And that naturalness narrative, that ideology of innate maternal ability in women, is what has prevented us from providing mothers and parents with the economic resources they need, the social resources they need, the communities that they need, in which to make their families, raise their families, but also to be people. Because the two things are not mutually exclusive, and I think our society would like us to think they are. There's this self-sacrificial idea around mothering that you see even on Mother's Day cards in the UK. Like you've given up everything for me. There's this narrative all the time, right?
Elinor, that's such a big part of this podcast, and this is one of the most important topics that I've discussed here and learned through my guests is this self-sacrificial element of mothering, and it's a huge topic, and that's something we really have to work on. Yeah. We have to get rid of that.
Yeah. It's so deeply ingrained, and I hope that the book gives a little bit of insight into how this ideology has come about and why this narrative of self-sacrifice and surrender of a woman's personhood to motherhood is so embedded in how we think about mothering and so internalized often by us. I hope it gives a little insight into how that's developed. I think the question of how you balance the sort of essentialism of womanhood and motherhood with celebrating mothering, I can only think about it through what we don't want to repeat from history and what we might like to dream for the future. And at the moment, we're seeing so many troubling narratives around pronatalism, so around the so-called fertility crisis, the so-called birth rate crisis. And with that, we're seeing a lot of right-wing, deeply conservative people reiterating the idea that women's primary purpose in society is to be in the home, bearing the children of men, to not be in the workplace, to not have the vote, to not have influence, to not be in control of their own lives. So for the future, where certain people are worried about birth rate stability, for example, the answer to the kinds of people who are truly worried about this is not to create a society in which anybody who wants to make a family can do so safely and with support and with economic resources and with great schools and great housing and not have to struggle for basic survival. They know that the answer, the people who peddle this stuff know that the answer is to revoke and roll back women's rights until that's the only choice that we have, is to be mothers and to be defined through our mothering. Mothering's been a hugely important part of my life and identity. That doesn't mean that I privilege that over any other kind of experience. It's just for me. And that's not just a kind of biological, romanticized thing. A lot of that has been the conditions in which I have mothered have been really good. I've had familial support. I'm in a good relationship. We have a lovely house. I have had the conditions in which I mother have meant that for me, I have been able to be a person and a mother. My personhood and my motherhood are not interlinked. They're not. I haven't had to give up aspects of myself for that, and I'm very conscious of it. But when you look back over history, there were women, especially, who were campaigning for women's rights as mothers and saying, if you want women to have children in the future, you have to assure them that they don't give up who they are themselves, their wants, their needs, their desires, their skills, their creativity, their intellect. So I think as long as we keep thinking towards this and keep acknowledging that mothering, if people want to make families, if people want to be mothers, set the social conditions first to make that safe and possible, and then let people build their families and make their families how they will.
Unfortunately, coming from Austria, oh my God, Elinor, we could talk for that the whole day, and now we have to. Unfortunately, coming from Austria, which is really a dream country when it comes to social support, from pregnancy leave to amazing health support, of health insurance. All the laws that protect women when they're pregnant, when they want to come back to work, preschools, free preschools, free university, free schools, everything else. And women still don't want to have many babies. So that's interesting. They have this opportunity to do exactly that, to have children, but keep their identities and their work and their other. It's not really working well for, but that's maybe
But it's really interesting because there were these like National Conservative group in the UK who are very right wing and very keen on the nuclear family being the only form of family that should be encouraged and incentivized, etc. It's bad stuff. It's horrible stuff. But they know full well that the so-called liberal measures, that what they would call liberal measures, the things you've just identified, don't encourage or necessarily encourage people to have more children. But I think it tells us something that the right wing just blame feminism, right, for us not having babies, not having as many babies, or not having babies at all. And they would associate things like free childcare and maternal health provision and equal pay and paternal leave, as they would associate that with the gains of feminism. So they're not interested in instituting that stuff because A, they know it doesn't lead to an increased birth rate, and B, they know it's feminism and it's going to destroy the world, of course. But I think it shows something that the right doesn't want to acknowledge, which is that the reasons for people not wanting to have children or opting out of family making is far more to do with the fear of the future than any demographers want to admit.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, and this is, we're told, we are in an unstable geopolitical situation in our world. We there's climate catastrophe, climate collapse, and the decisions. Bringing children into the world is not just about a matter of identity, choice, and economics. There are existential questions involved in that. And this is a reality. And there is, that I guess is what I mean also by the shifting of societal priorities, like help give us at least some commitment to building towards a sustainable world, and then let's talk about
exactly
whether or not we want to have more babies. I guess, yeah.
Elinor, let's talk about mom now. I know we've been talking about mom for a long time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your mom, Sarah. I just read about her in your book yesterday. Will you tell my listeners a little bit about her life story, and then we'll learn from her?
Yeah, so my mother was born just after the Second World War, just before the NHS in England was launched. And she was born to a couple who had both begun to make their lives, begun to settle down just after the war, who both fought in the war, who both contributed to the war effort. So my mum was very much what they call a baby boomer. And she grew up at a time in the 1950s where culture was really insisting on the fulfillment of women within the home, insisting upon certain visions of domesticity as its antidote to the chaos and deprivation of the war. So very traditional, nuclear family. She had a younger brother, so they were just the two of them. But my mother, while she grew up in a very sort of traditional kind of English, British family with pretty straightforward values and very normal, very ordinary, my mother was never, she was really the first generation of women who had any real meaningful capacity to choose what to do with her body and her life. And so she was of the first generation of women who could use the contraceptive pill, for example. She was of the first generation of women who had access to the milieu of feminist ideas, feminist publications, feminist community. She was at absolutely the right age for women's liberation, for it to be not just an idea, but a genuine liberation in her life and life choices. And so she went traveling all over the world. She worked, she lived in London. She had a very free and sort of undetermined existence of her own making. And she became pregnant with me after a short relationship. And the situation of that relationship for making a family wasn't ideal. It wasn't possible. So she made the decision to have me and raise me on her own. Now, I was born in 1980. I was born, and so I was a young child of a single mother during the time that Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in the UK. And Thatcher in the UK and Reagan in the US brought with them this ideology of stigma and prejudice against people who were dependent on the welfare state, on the welfare system. And as a single parent, a lone parent, my mother was dependent on the welfare system. But although she didn't personally encounter any prejudice, she always told me that she loved raising me on her own, that this was what she chose. She chose this freely. She chose this intentionally. She was still a single mother raising a child at a time when single mothers and the children of lone parent families were seen as a drain on the welfare state, like still defined as bastard children. And she would have social services officers come to her house to make sure that she hadn't moved a man in, because if you have paternal support of any kind, then you're not necessarily able to be in receipt of assistance, of certain kinds of assistance, like housing benefit or universal credit, things like that, as they were known then. And so she raised me in this spirit of, I chose you, I intended for you. And she really did. I mean, she was self-sacrificial in the sense that she did everything she could to make my life and my childhood beautiful and warm and kind and funny. She's an incredibly good cook. She's very resourceful. She's an excellent gardener. I know that it was, and as I've got older, I've talked to her much more about how difficult it was for her, like economically. She had support of her parents. She had great friends. She had her brother, but it was still exceptionally difficult for her to get by. And she always had to work outside of the home as well. So there was a sort of hard scrabble existence to it all. But I didn't know about this child. I didn't realize this.
Yeah. No, you don't, no.
No.
You're just enjoying your childhood.
Yeah. And so she created for me something that, you know, has really formed who I am. That there's something very specific and intimate about the relationship, I think, especially between a solo mother and a daughter.
Yeah.
And I don't just owe my literal survival and existence to her. I owe so much about how I see the world and how I value other people to her. And I also owe a lot about how I understand mothering and motherhood. Because as I write in the book, I write about my mother, Sarah, towards the end of the book. And I make this point that, okay, so feminism and the new ideas around motherhood and maternity that were coming through from feminist thinking, feminist publications like Spare Rib, for example, they were sort of galvanizing when it came to her choice to be a single mother and do this on her own. But there was always, that was never, so that's true, but it wasn't a feminist project to have me.
Yeah.
It was just that it gave her a way of thinking about what it meant to be a single mother that wasn't rooted in shame and wasn't rooted in, I've made a mistake, I've done something terrible. There was nothing stigmatizing or shaming for her about her situation or her identity as a mother. And when you're raised by a single mother, as I write in the book, you're raised by a community of mothers because solo parents have to rely on each other. They do not have the immediate infrastructure of the parental family. And so my mother was also a childminder, so she would look after other people's children before and after school. When I left home, and I've got a half brother and a half sister, and when I left home to go to university, and then when they left, my mother worked as a foster carer. So she cared for mainly undocumented asylum-seeking children who came into the UK. So her mothering, from how I have grown up and becoming a mother myself during the time that my mum was a foster carer, and seeing how for her mothering was work, literally economic work for her. She made it her work. But it was also a responsibility rooted in love and rooted in a commitment to a better world. And she is an incredibly grounded and down-to-earth and very good-humoured person who would probably not articulate mothering in those terms. But from what I have seen of her, she has a political sensibility into which mothering is braided. You know, the work of mothering, of caring for children, of centering the needs of children in society is incredibly important for her. And she put us all first, biological children and foster children. But that didn't mean that she has sacrificed and surrendered who she is as a person. She's always shown me that mothering is that all the, stuff that we're sold and the images of it that we're fed and the perfection around it and the little outfits and the beautiful looking nursery has got nothing to do with any of it. And her capacity to love and care without any martyrdom, without any of this kind of narrative of I gave you, like she would never say
victimization. Yeah,
no. And she hasn't always had an easy time. It is hard to make, to be a mother of a child. It was hard at that time in British society. It was economically tough. It was hard for her, rebuilding her life, having other relationships and having to, think about who you let into your life because you have a child. All this stuff is difficult, but she's still, her mothering is a complete inspiration to me. And she's had such a profound influence on the way that I not raise my children, but the way that I look to them as people, not as something that I own. I never felt owned by my mother. I've never felt any time that I was her possession. And I think my brother and sister would agree. We're not her. She doesn't have that sort of possessive ownership of us. We're all our own people, and we owe that to her. She's extraordinary. She's an extraordinary person.
How is she doing now? What is she doing now?
She's doing very well. She is retired, so she's not doing foster caring. She retired a couple of years ago, and she loves cooking and she loves gardening. She keeps in touch with so many of her foster children too. They all keep in touch. Many of them have gone on to have their own children, their own families, which is so lovely to see. And she is, I'm going to see her this afternoon, actually.
Oh, great. Say hello.
Yeah, I certainly will.
Elinor, you kind of shared some lessons, but would you help me distill the most important lessons you've learned from her?
I think the most important lesson in terms of my own mothering has been probably that you don't own them, but they are your children are people, their own people. And that doesn't mean you have to be distanced or withhold affection or not care, but respecting them as their own people with their own emotions and their own need for a kind of sovereignty and a separateness from you is really important. Like, I don't want to enact my kind of, failed dreams through my children, for example. And it's not, it's easy to say these things. I'm not perfect at it at all, but I think she's taught me that children are people, not your possessions. They're not, they're of you, but they're not you, they're not extensions of you. And that's really helped me to not try to project too much of my nonsense onto them. And it's easier now that they're older. My children are 18 and 16, of course, and they do have their independence and their privacy and their lives and their friends. So it's easier now than when they were small. But yeah, just honouring them as the people they are. That's something she's taught me that's really important. And the other thing that she's taught me is that good humour is essential in all situations. That doesn't mean diminishing or minimizing, but the way that she retains her good humour in the face of some, serious stuff. She's taught me that humour is very connective, and it's, for her, a mark of acceptance. It's familial. And so that's something that's been really important to to who I am as a person, not just as a mother, but as a person.
Anything else? Or
there's a strength and a surety in her that I have only hoped to emulate. There's a sense of her knowledge of who she is. I've never seen or remember my mum, and I'm sure this is different for her internally in her internal life, but she's always projected an absolute surety in herself as a person, in her decisions, in her thoughts and opinions. I mean, she's strong. She's a strong woman, and she is incredibly kind and accepting and not judgmental at all. She's kind without having to be always nice.
Yeah.
And also something that's really important.
That's important.
The value of kindness, and kindness being such an integral part of strength, especially for women. I think that's very important. We can be kind and we can be strong and have boundaries and be, in my mom's words, like stand up for ourselves, or, not take any prisoners, like the way that she would put it. But I think that's been incredibly important too. And something that I would really hope, something that she definitely taught me as I was growing up. It's easy to receive these lessons, not always easy to consistently enact them, but that the value of your kindness and your sort of commitment to the people that you love, but also your boundaries. And that doesn't mean going, no, I have no room, I have no space. It just means being, having a surety and having a sense of she's unapologetic, right? About who she is.
Yeah.
And that's something I've also always tried to instill in my children, in my boys. And in the society we live in, where boys are not necessarily socialized or conditioned to speak about their emotions a lot, I think a lot of what my mum's taught me is that give your kids space to express their emotions. Don't try and fix everything. Don't try to patch everything up, but listen, give space to how they feel, acknowledge it, let them talk about it. She did that for me, and I've always tried to do that with my boys too.
Elinor, I have one last question.
Of course.
It's always the interesting one. Is there anything important you wish she had taught you or was able to teach you? Anything important that you had to learn yourself?
I think that because my mother has always been very maternal centric. So her identity as a mother and as a person in the world, she has never identified herself through relationships. She's heterosexual, so just have relationships with men. She is married at the moment, has been married to my stepfather for a long time, but she has never. So I think I'll leap forward to what I'm trying to say, which is that she didn't really teach me about how to have relationships.
How tough relationships are?
Yeah, she didn't teach me about relationships as like I didn't feel very prepared. And often I felt like I think that there are lots of reasons why my mum doesn't really talk a lot about or give a lot of importance to, say, romance relationships, for example. Always friendship's so important to her. Her friends, she's got friends that she's had forever, for all her life nearly still. And that's been really important. She's really taught me the value of your friends. But I think as I got older and started having kind of, I guess, serious relationships, it's never been something that I've really been kind of talked about, or I didn't really know how to navigate that. I haven't really seen much of an example about how to navigate like intimate romantic relationships. So it's really interesting. And it's not that I wish she taught me differently. It's maybe that I didn't ever see her expressing maybe emotions around how she thought
A
of herself
partner or
in that way.
Okay. Oh, that is so. Now you gave me a lot of homework to think about this, because I have not learned that from my parents at all, because they separated when I was 9, and there was a vacuum of relationship and partnerships. So I grew up without any modeling of that, A. And B, because maybe I did, as you were speaking, I was like, oh my God, I also never talk about it. I am lucky to be in a good relationship, but it's not a topic. It's not something that I feel I talk to but I do teach him to have friends.
Yes.
So thank you for this. I will think about this.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Interesting,
it's really one to think about. Yeah.
Interesting. Because often women tell me, that their mothers do teach them about relationships, and, they model these relationships and this and that. But sometimes we don't.
Yeah, friendship was absolutely modeled.
Yeah.
Friendship and family, being there for family.
Yeah.
Creating a family of friends, that was really modeled. Like the chosen family thing was very modeled.
I am so guilty for that. I am an only child. My husband is an only child, and we have an only child. So we are really teaching him about family.
It's so
interesting. Interesting. Thank you.
But
Thank you.
When it came to, I guess, sort of intimate, romantic, who I was as a young woman, falling in love, what that meant. So I think, because I know that she's felt it, she's been through, I know that. I know that but it was always felt like a part of her that she kept very private and very shadowed away. Maybe
Same
even
with
to
my
herself,
mom.
I don't know. But
same. Interesting. Elinor, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing so many important messages, lessons, wisdoms, food for thought, inspirations. We have so much work ahead of us still. We've come a long way, but we have a lot. And again, thank you for your beautiful books. Thank you for putting them out there in the world. They are very important.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to think so carefully about them and for inviting me on. It's been such an honor.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Tider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.